Hello, 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 and welcome to today's episode of Her Version. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of struggle and triumph, a platform that allows individuals to tell their truth in order to inspire and uplift others. For those of you that are new to this podcast and like content like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button, follow, like, and share. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria. Let's jump right in. Hello, and thank you for joining us today on this episode of Her Version. The Her Version platform is built on storytelling and the understanding that many times our greatest learning experiences come from listening to other people's stories. Today, I'm speaking with an amazing woman named Anne-Margaret. Anne-Margaret is a spiritual channel, chakra virtuoso, and a spiritual and relationship coach. She is here to tell a story of alchemizing pain into self-embodiment and the importance of raising your vibration. Welcome, Anne-Margaret. How are you today?
Hi, it's so good to be here with you. Thank you so much for having me. And I love the emphasis on storytelling and the richness of all the women. I just love it, love it, love it.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Not everybody gets it. So I appreciate it when I have women who come on the platform that understand that it's part of our story, and it helps people understand themselves a little bit more. And it's important to bring that out every once in a while and share it and
absolutely
and reminisce about the good and the bad and help other people through their own stuff.
So how are such a source of support for each other as women? Like I know I mentioned to you before that I've led a women's circle for like 20 years now, and we all have stories to support one another. And that's one of our greatest gifts, is coming together and sharing that. So indigenous times to now, I mean, that's one of the most powerful ways to process trauma and share wisdom.
100%. I love it. Do you have a story behind the beautiful quilt behind you?
Oh, yes, I do. Well, it's a little multifaceted, but I'll give you the nutshell version. Okay. My husband and I, when we were in India about 10 years ago, we found this in Agra, where the Taj Mahal is. And we just fell in love with it. We love India so much. It was just, it's such a magical experience. But also the reason why I hold it behind me for all of my coaching sessions or whenever I'm teaching or doing podcasts or interviews is because I am the queen of alchemy and chakras. Like, I love taking something, and those of you who are not familiar with the word alchemy, it is taking something seemingly useless and extracting the gold out of it. And so much of our suffering comes from not recognizing the brilliance and the beauty and the gold that we have in the most embarrassing and seemingly shameful or discardable aspects of who we are in our lives. So having this behind me is all these little pieces of all these randomly scrapped, thrown away pieces of fabric that come together and make just a beautiful backdrop.
Oh, I love that. Absolutely. And thank you for sharing the thought process behind that. I never even really thought of that before.
It's kind of been my obsession for a long time now, because, we go through everything that we go through in life, and we want to be a certain way for other people. We want to be a certain way for thinking that we should be this way according to society or whatever it is. And if we don't know how to alchemize those things, we shame them and they go into our shadow, and then they drain us of our power.
Absolutely. Definitely. Well, we are here to tell a little storytelling today, and I certainly hope that you are open to that. And I appreciate you being here and taking some time. For those of you that are already jumping on live, thank you for hanging out with us and spending some time with Anne-Margaret and I while we chit chat. But I would love to kind of just jump in and ask you about one of the biggest challenges you've had in your life. I'd love to hear a story about that and what you learned from that challenge.
Well, I love the question. And it's like these big questions that were like, how do we even sum up our lives in a nutshell of a story? So I like the challenge in itself. I think for the longest time, I would always invalidate my own story because I didn't have this like pivotal car accident that happened, or like this thing that like changed the rest of my life forever. It was very much a very slow burn unfolding. And, but as far as putting it into a story, I'll do my best with this, is that I have been obsessed with trying to figure out the formulas of life, of being human, seeing the suffering around me and not understanding why we're not doing better. And that's something since I was a little kid. I mean, my first memory was, I was raised Catholic, and my first memory is sitting in a Catholic pew, those super comfortable seats, of course, and my little legs swinging. So I don't think I was more than maybe 3 or 4 years old maximum. And I remember looking around and thinking, why are we inside? And then I thought, why aren't people just talking to God with their minds? And like, that's my very first memory I've ever had. And what has been the seed that kind of planted the rest of my trajectory. Looking back, I can see it now, although I don't know where I'm going, but I know where I'm headed. That really started so much of my obsession with how are we getting this wrong? Like, how are we suffering through life, or just hoping to live a good enough life so we can get to heaven, or we can go on to something next after we die? Like, why are we wasting this precious gift of life and this opportunity to create and to experience and to grow? Why are we disconnected from God? And everybody replace that with source or love or universal consciousness. I use the word God because it's a 3-letter simple word, but I understand it can be very triggering. So that's something that for me, like, has always been the dangling carrot of my career. And I never really saw it like my work as much as my need for healing. I would see people around me suffering in my own family and my own community, see people suffering around the world and not understand, like, why are we getting this so wrong? So for my own personal development, it started in the Catholic Church. It started in a way that I love the music. I love the connection. I love the message, but I couldn't reconcile some of the things that I was learning that weren't adding up to either my own experience of God or also the logic and reasoning side of things. Like, if God created everything and everything is good and all is divine and everything, like, how did this little sneaky devil get out of heaven? And what's the role of demons? And what's the role of evil and pain? And so that's been the driving source of my life and my work.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, I could say more, but I don't know if you want me to expound on some of the other challenges from that, but that's where it starts.
I love that you kind of opened up with, it was kind of a slow burn as far as that goes. One of the things that I've had to adjust with me talking to just bringing people onto the podcast is kind of adjusting my story a little bit, because my story can kind of seem a little on the drastic side. And sometimes people are like, my story is nothing like your story. This is very intimidating for me. I don't think I'm the right guest for your podcast. And I love how, it's not always something that's this big catastrophic thing like a car accident, like you said, but the challenges, the hills, the mountains, everything that we go through can seem very heavy as we are going through our journey. As far as looking back now and where you are sitting today in 2022, what do you think's been the greatest learning experience you've had from your journey?
Definitely being ostracized. I think one of the things that's most important to us as human beings is this tribal sense of belonging, being able to fit in somewhere. It's why we see such a divide in our political realm or religious realm, or a lot of the systems that we use to identify who we are, who we think we are. And we do it not only to kind of get the right winning team, to get that boost of like, oh, I've got the right answer, but also to have more of a sense of tribal belonging, of people who we feel like we're like-minded with, like my thing is RaiseTheVibration. That's been my whole message forever, for decades now. And And it's like, find your vibe, find your tribe. Like it's so important for us to have community. And I mean, I ran a spiritual center in New York City for 18 years, and that was so critical. And so for me, and what drove me to open that center, very subconsciously until it became more of a conscious realization, was my need for community, my need for belonging. And when I opened that center in New York, in Astoria, the most culturally diverse county of Queens in the entire world, according to the census, uh, I ended up opening in a space where we wanted to make it inclusive and have people belong, regardless of what Lululemon pants they wore, or if they worship Krishna or whatever. Like, we didn't want you to feel like you even had to be there every day, or you weren't a good enough yogi, or get your massage or whatever. Like, ostracizing is one of the most challenging things for us as humans when we are kind of knocked out of the group. And being raised in a very devoted Catholic family, and I know you know about this with your own story, when you feel that you're not adding up to what is in alignment with what you're being taught you should be, there's a discordance that happens, and then there starts to become a hiding of parts of yourself, or shaming, and then the knife either turns outward towards other people to kind of like fight them and shame them and blame them, and then you're a victim still, or it turns inward, and it's really self-destructive and self-sabotaging. But there's always a third option, like fighting outward or fighting inward. It's really alchemizing. It's integrating all aspects. So I think feeling that ostracizing or ostracism through my life has really taught me so much about where I want to belong. And that's within myself. That's with my relationship with God, my purpose, my partner, my family, and not sacrificing my integrity, my character, my sense of truth in order to gain acceptance from others.
Absolutely. When you talk about ostracizing and your backstory with that, this is, I think unless it's happened to you, it's kind of hard to explain it. But it's, I have that same very similar story, ostracized, pregnant at 20, and was cut off from everything I knew, everybody who I knew, including my family. Yeah. And, this is kind of hitting a little nerve for me right now, because my sister just reached out to me, and this is by no means to like call anybody out or something, but she is diligently trying to get me back to where she believes a person should be spiritually.
Yeah.
And her bringing up me getting cut off and how I shouldn't be holding resentment anymore, and that she didn't say like get over it, but she's a very loving person, but basically like, hey, listen, you need to put that away and come back. And what's so frustrating about that is like, I have put it away and I'm totally fine. Like, I am fine now where I am, but because my spirituality isn't where she thinks it should be, she is now viewing that as me still holding resentment towards what happened to me. When I know you said you were holding, you do hold women's circles, and the importance of community, the importance of tribe. When somebody doesn't have that, when somebody is isolated, when somebody doesn't feel like there's a group of people or persons that they can turn to speak, what is the effect? What is the feelings that come to bay, personally, your personal experience?
I think it's one of the most detrimental things that we can face as humans is our separateness, and we can't avoid it. We're separate and we're connected. We have this, no one can go through our lives except us. No one can know what it's like to walk in our shoes but us. And we don't know what it's like to walk in anyone else's shoes as well. I mean, that's one of the most challenging things. That is the reality of our human experience, is we feel connected to one another. We feel that like oneness and that like woo woo sort of hippy dippy feel. Like we all feel that on some level. And then we also have to reconcile our reality of separateness. And they can't fight one another. We can't glorify oneness and demonize separateness. We need to embrace that both need to coexist for us to be successful humans. So we know, like in looking at addiction or looking at depression or those who attempt or commit suicide, the root of all of that is separateness. The root of all of that is a lack of intimacy, is not having the connection. Every single addiction, because when we are not connected, and I'm not just talking about substances, I'm talking about work, talking about the negative mindset of not being good enough. That's an addiction too. We all have addictions, every single one of us. And the root of that is a lack of intimacy, a lack of being able to connect with your physical body, a lack of connection with this reality and the acceptance of just being a human being, lack of intimacy with God or the greater energy or that interconnectivity that we can connect with.
Wow. When you say separateness, what does that mean to you?
Separateness is our experience of the ego. Like so many spiritual teachers will demonize the ego, which I think is a huge mistake, and it's a trap, because the ego is our vehicle to move through life. It's our vehicle to be able to understand how we can create and experience and grow in a separate form. It's like some people say, you know, God created this place so that, you know, could see individual creations, you know, like what they're going to do with their free will. And I would always ask these questions. I'm like, well, how does this, none of this is making sense to me until it did, which is like, if we're here, like, why are we here? That's the big question. You know, why are we here? We're here to grow. We're here to learn. And we're grow, experience, and create. And we're not here to get it perfect. We're not here to live somebody else's life. We're here to go through a separate sense of experience, of existence that we don't have in the oneness. That's what most people reject in this human experience, is that they'll glorify the oneness or just till we get to heaven, and they'll waste their entire life on all of the painful teachers and the traumatic teachers and all the things that really give us the adversity in order for us to grow stronger. They'll want to kind of discard that or put it just behind them rather than alchemize the gold that's in them and regain the strength. So that separateness is our gift that most, I find, reject, that we would not experience ourselves as creators have we not had that experience of separateness and oneness.
Wow. So I'm not gonna lie, you saying that we shouldn't demonize ego is like everything to me, because this was a huge conversation between my fiance and I. So I've been sober for 16 or so years.
Amazing.
And I got sober on my own. So I did not get sober with a 12-step or with AA or anything like that.
Wow.
Just grit and grind. And like, I had to like step up for my son. I was a single mom and I was just
super badass, girl. Super badass.
But I didn't even know that like AA existed. So I was getting like thoughts of like suicide and all of just wanting wanting to numb and like, how do I numb stuff? It was very frustrating. But anyways, when I met my fiance, who's also sober, coincidentally, he got sober through the 12-step. And there's a lot of talk about ego in there. And when him and I met, I'm very girl power. Came from a narcissistic abusive relationship. I'm like, no more. I'm all power now. And I stand my ground with 2 feet on the ground, and I speak my mind. I'm very good at communicating. I'm also very good at bragging about myself, because I think that that's important. And I think that not enough women understand how important it is to say with your words out loud that you are capable of doing things. And this caught him off guard, like so much so that I'm starting to get teary-eyed a little bit. But this caught him off guard when we first started hanging out, because he's like, holy crap, like you need to check your ego for real. And he was demonizing it. That's literally what I was telling him, was like, you're making this seem as if it is a bad thing. And it's not a bad thing to have to have an ego, or to be confident, or to
Mhm.
like put yourself first, or to brag. But I'm wondering, what is your definition of ego? What does ego mean?
So this is something that can be such a area of contention for people if it's not framed in a very clear way. So I'll be as clear as I can be. Not one of us is without an ego. Not one of us can do anything selflessly. Selflessly. We cannot do anything selflessly. And the moment that we believe we can, we're in the ego. Okay?
What? I
Meaning,
freaking love this.
so this is really critical, because when it's kind of like unlocks a couple of the miracles or the magic of life, because when we realize and we embrace the ego in a way that we are master over it, rather than the other way around. The ego isn't driving the bus. The ego is in the passenger seat or in the back seat, right? The ego is never driving the bus. When the ego is driving the bus, that's when people think of ego as you're full of yourself. That's ego as saying like, I'm better than you, I'm dominating you, or I'm not good enough, I'm not as good as you. You're also in the ego when you're in that space, okay? It's anytime you're avoiding domination or dominating. It's anytime you're in that comparison of me versus you.
Okay.
All right.
Yes.
So that's really important, because when you think of the ego, it is our vehicle to experience and grow and create in this world. It's the way that we can step into the fullness of our sovereignty, owning our gifts. And if we're owning our gifts at someone else's expense, we're not there. We're in the ego. We're in the shadow aspect of the ego. We're not in the light attribute of the ego, which is embodiment of your true gifts, of your radiance, your ability to move through this world.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's a big difference than being in the ego because you're trying to prove that you're better than somebody else, or
Yes.
that somebody else is better than you. And then we get this like false humility. So when you think of like you can't do anything that's selfless, anytime you think of like somebody who volunteers their time, and, wow, you're so selfless, or takes care of their parents. Like, we just moved back from New York City after 20 years to be closer to my parents in Colorado. People are like, oh, that's so great that you're doing that. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm getting so much out of it. Like, if you don't get what you're getting out of it, you're in the ego somehow, and that blinds you.
Wow. I feel like we could do a whole podcast just on this, because the depth of that, I almost can't I understand, but I like can't understand, but I can.
I get it. Listen, this has been my obsession my whole life. Like, I
love it.
That's the whole nature of my methodology. Like, I had to come up with something that made sense to me and use my practical brain. I'm a classical trained pianist and a singer-songwriter, right? So my left brain was very developed growing up, and I was so grateful for that. But I tend to be more that creative, but my parents, my mom was a mathematician, my father an engineer. They were both entrepreneurs, both teachers. So they said, if I came home with less than an A in math, I was grounded, so I didn't really have a choice to not really step into my left brain. And I feel like so much of our relationship to spirituality is having to forego our logical brain and our questions, where I teach a practical spirituality methodology, so that if it doesn't make sense to your logical brain, it's because there's some false belief or some misconception or some misalignment of your energy.
Absolutely. Definitely. What do you think is the meaning of life?
You're throwing these very, very small questions at me. I mean, come on, don't you have anything big? I love it. These are the best conversations. They're so fun. I think the meaning of life is to come here and to experience, grow, and create. Very simply, experience what we have to experience and move through things that are not easy, that are painful, that are great teachers, that are carving out depths within us to have more compassion and empathy or a different perspective in life. The growth piece is we're growing from one point to the next. It doesn't always mean for people that they're growing in a linear way, or even a way that's going upwards or improving. Growing sometimes means growing more deeply into the shadow, or growing more deeply into that experience of maybe a negative aspect of an archetype, of an expression, and then creating. We are either creating things that we're proud of and things that we, excuse me, are doing things that are expressions of who we are and the light attribute of that, or we're creating more shadow. But we're here to experience, grow, and create. And I mean, my background when I was in high school and college was theater. That's why I use a lot of archetype imagery in all of my teaching. And with every character, there's a light attribute and a shadow attribute to it. And you wouldn't have the hero without the villain.
Yes.
So without the trauma, without the perpetrator of the trauma, you would not step into a self-realized awakening of your majestic self. You don't condone the trauma or the perpetrating of that, but that's how you make peace. That's how you, and that's all we want, is to find peace in our existence of being here and why we're here.
Yeah. What about to those that either refuse or just aren't growing, experiencing, or creating? What happens?
Well, I think everybody actually is doing those three things, either consciously or unconsciously. It just might not be the way that we want them to, you know?
Oh, okay.
Everybody's already they're having their own experience, they're growing, they're creating. I mean, I could share a lot of different stories, but I'll just say that people will choose what they want to choose. And in order to find peace with your life, you must accept that other people have that own free will. I believe in that God-given free will, that we do have freedom to do with our lives what we want, to create how we wish to create. And those who we are not acting the way that we want them to, we're going to be suffering, because the root of all suffering, from the Buddhists to a lot of different religions will say it's the root of all suffering is one thing: it's resistance.
Yeah. So I love that. And that is aligned with what I believe, now that you just checkmated me there. But
I love chess, by the way. I love that you just said that. It's one of my favorite. I was in the chess club in high school. I was such a nerd. Still a nerd.
Yeah. I love it. But my question to go along with that is, if someone is feeling amiss, if someone is feeling disconnected, could it be because they're not growing, experiencing, or creating?
Stagnancy, absolutely. Okay. They can feel like but I could also argue that they're creating more of what they're creating, which is liking to stay in their comfort zone, whether their comfort zone is miserable, uneventful, whatever it is, they're still creating that. And so really my focus and methodology is about putting people in, and which is what I had to do first. Like, I didn't learn this at a school. Like, I had to go through my own process and really learn experientially. But that's what I help people do, is get people into the driver's seat of their life, which is full ownership for the way that it's all showing up. And that can be very painful, and it can also be incredible. It is always very liberating, I should say. So in stepping into that, then you say, all right, do I want to stay here, or do I want to shake things up?
Definitely.
There's no right or wrong answer. This whole idea of, no right or wrong, that kind of was going around for a while, and people were like, oh, I don't like that because it sounds like moral relativism. And it's like, well, you're missing the point. Like, there's the right or wrong argument is a polarity argument. And maybe this is getting a little heady, but this is like what I nerd out on, is that polarity is that separateness of thinking that it's got to be this way or this way. And in an argument, like when you're fighting with somebody, you're like, no, I see it this way. And they're like, well, I see it this way. The truth is never in the other extreme of that polarity. It's always the middle path.
Wow.
It's always the third option. It's never the extreme. So when you think of like right or wrong, it's like, well, which one is actually the one that I want to go towards? And so I look at more, rather than right or wrong, is cost and benefit. Like, every choice you make, if you steer towards right or wrong, then there's like an external validation that you're a good girl, or you're living the right life in accordance with our society. And you don't get your own GPS then. Like, you don't really tap into your intuition or your direct connection with God at all. If you look at the cost and the benefit to everything, then you go, okay, doing this will cost me this, but hey, I get this, is it worth the cost? Is it compromising my integrity or my character? And getting in touch with those aspects of who you are That's stepping into true self-esteem, true ego, and true light.
Yes. Cost versus benefit.
Cost or benefit. Like every
Cost or
choice has a cost and a benefit.
everyone, whether you choose right or wrong, good
Right
or
or
bad.
wrong is going to be different according to a lot of different people. It's what's the cost and the benefit. And
Yes.
so, you know, and to kind of introduce one more thing here that I think would be helpful to kind of frame this conversation a little bit is something I call the third nature, or the chosen third nature. Like when we come into this life, we are just like, hey, you know, like we're the center of our universe, or like something. Well, ideally we're being like changed and fed and held, and like, you know, that's the ideal, of course, but we have a certain freedom and an openness with that first nature. And then we go through a domestication process through our parents or our community or our church or society, our schooling, our teachers, our influences. And that second nature is the adaptation of the reality of the people who are taking care of us or influencing us. It's not reality. It's an adaptation of their version or the collective version of that reality. So again, we've got another thing that we've adopted that we don't know if it's really us or if it's somebody else that we adopted because we wanted to be loved by them or accepted by them into the tribe. And the real work and the real magic, I think, happens when you step into your chosen third nature, which is understanding what of that second nature is actually true and what do you want to sculpt with your brain? Like, how do you want to create a reality that reflects your true essence of that first nature?
Yes. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, but I'm wondering, do you have a story or an example of what it would be like to argue or have a conversation with somebody
Yeah.
the way that you're explaining it, where there is no right or wrong? There's benefit versus cost, and what that looks, because I'm like going in my head and I'm like, what's an argument that I've had where I would appreciate seeing what this would look like? Do you have something that you could give me off the top of your head? Not to like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
if we stop and think about it, it's like every single experience in our life could be deduced into this, and kind of, I love formulas. So I feel like everything could kind of pass through this formula and we go, okay, I see my blind spot. I see where I'm trying to control. I see where I'm judging. I'm in my ego. And so example of this is this. So I've mentioned the ostracizing. This was a big one for me. About 10 years ago, when gay marriage became legalized in New York City, I had a childhood friend reach out to me and say, would you be willing to officiate our wedding? And it was a girlfriend of mine from childhood, absolutely adored her so much. And it wasn't legal where she was living. And she also knew I'm an interfaith minister. So for the first 2 years of our marriage, my husband and I went through an interfaith seminary in Manhattan, where you study all the world religions. You learn how to bridge gaps of people of different faith and cultures. And so we're wedding officiants. We do all kinds of ceremonies and spiritual counseling. And so I said, of course, like I happily do that. I wasn't providing a Christian marriage. I wasn't providing a sanctified marriage according to the church. I was legally binding them and creating a beautiful ceremony to represent their love and for one another. And I was happy to do that. My judgments about it have nothing to do with it. Your judgments, you know, anybody's judgments, it's what was legal, what is legal to do in order to give them their freedom of being married. This is a huge hot topic. It's one of the buzz topics for people to go, wow, I'm going to go left or I'm going to go right politically. I mean, I'm going to vote for this or vote. So it's a very hot topic. For me in my life, I mean, I've always kind of felt like the outsider. So I've always rooted for the underdog, like the Scrappy Doo in the Scooby-Doo series, like, you know, just fight like the underdog. So I always want to stand up for people's rights, and especially with that category in order to have the legal representation around that. So in response to that, I ended up getting disowned by my own parents for 2 years. And fortunately, it was only 2 years. And it was a very, very painful point in my life. For 2 years in my 30s. This isn't like I was in my teenage years selling drugs or my body on the street or like all like it was I was the center of a spiritual community in New York City, doing a lot of good work, feeling really good about how I was helping others, and it was very tough. It was very tough. And I could have gotten 100 people on my side saying, aren't they wrong? They're wrong, right? Like, I'm right. Like, and having this whole disclaimer about everything, why I did what I did. And I shared a little bit about that when I started the story. I could have gotten a lot of people on my side to say that I was right and they were wrong. Mm-hmm. And even, I mean, I had my own sister even saying, you need to go on antidepressants or something because this is bad. Like, this is a really tough thing. I'm like, I know, but I'm not going to stand in the place of ego and the shadow aspect of it and say that is not okay. Because I know my parents, I mean, I have such a close relationship with them now. I thank God every day for that. And I think it's just the most beautiful miracle that ever. Don't ever give up on somebody, but just hold that space. You know, I really believe in that. Not that you put your neck out over and over again. You hold the space. So when I was going through that, I just told her, I said, no, I don't think what they're doing is wrong. What they're doing, I know them. I know their character. I know that they're doing this because they think it's the right thing to do. I could try and convince everybody else that it was wrong, and I wouldn't even have to try very hard. But it was part of my deepest challenge and my greatest transformation at the time to love them, accept them, project onto them that they were doing this because they loved me and thought it was the best thing for me. Even though it was one of the most painful 2 years of my life. We didn't want to start a family during that time because what if we got pregnant? They think about all the ramifications going through. And I mean, there's so many examples in my life of things like this that are super painful in order to stand in your truth, in order to, and it was very, very painful. And we all know what that's like. We don't have to have a big story, but we all know what that's like to feel like you're just not, like, something's happened and you can't control it. Yeah. And the only thing I could control was my interpretation of what was going on. And there might, like my sister's like, you should go on antidepressants or take something so you don't have to deal with it. I'm like, this is painful. This is life. Like, I need to cry. I need to be angry. I need to rage and go through all my emotions because I know that the emotional body is there to purify us. I mean, I had done so much work at that point and taught forever that I knew that much. So when that occurred for me 10 years ago in my early 30s, I knew that that was a very big opportunity for me to deepen my capacity to love, to deepen my compassion of acceptance and empathy, and then also kind of test my ability to manifest in my life. Like, I couldn't control that. I knew I can control that, but could I hold the space so that if they ever did reconcile or reach out again, that I wouldn't have all this resentment inside, that I would drop that. And like, it's not selfless. Like, I wasn't forgiving them for them. I was doing it to free myself up so I could come back to my own heart, tap into that loving essence that I am naturally, and love to radiate, right? I don't want all that heaviness on me.
Exactly.
So I just started digging and getting out of it and had to go through a lot of deep work. But how I grew through those 2 years was unparalleled.
That's awesome. We have a question, I think, if you want to read it out loud.
Why do we take it so seriously as we are just visiting? Do your best and be full of love. What religion does that? Oh, that's a beautiful question. That's Dane Walders. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Dane. Forgive me if not. It's a great question. I mean, my answer to that is, and there's a lot of beautiful, advice to do your best and be full of love. Agreed. I'll start at the end. What religion does that? I studied all the religions for most of them. I mean, there are so many sects of Christianity. I think there's I don't even know how many thousands of sects of Christianity there are just in the United States alone. So I haven't studied all of those. But the major religions all teach, the most beautiful spiritual masters all teach very similar, profound teachings to help us practically move through our life and relate in a practically spiritual way. You look at the 10 Commandments from Christianity. I mean, that is something, or Judaism, obviously, too, that you look at that and you think, well, that's a really good idea. That's a great guideline. I mean, yes. And are there exceptions? And are there ways that we need to kind of like deal with the minute details or the variations for our own experience? Yes. I believe it's more in the way that the religion is taught or used as a source of control or manipulation or egoic hierarchical structure, rather than acknowledging that we are all daughters and sons of God, or we all have sovereignty in this universe, that we all can be connected to that power of love. And I do think that we take it so seriously because of our dysfunctional relationship to death. I think that we are so concerned about dying that root chakra, I'm obsessed with the chakras, the root chakra fear of fight or flight is found in that root. And when we come into this world, that fight or flight develops the very first thing. So in our brains, it's one of the first things that develops. So that's why we take it seriously, is that when we're fighting with somebody, I'm sure you've had this experience, like you're fighting with somebody and you're way more upset than you should be. What's going on? Yeah. You're like, oh, I'm upset, right? So it's because it's triggering all of the deeper synapses in your mind that go back to, oh my God, I'm going to die alone on the street, homeless, separate. Like we have that as the root of all of our fears or complaints, and why we take things seriously is we have this very dysfunctional relationship to death and life. You know, if we can't have one, we can't have the other.
Definitely. He asked also about humanism. Do you know about humanism? And then he said, we can find good in all of them and leave the rest, perhaps.
Well, I think what we're seeing is, yes, I do know humanism. I think the desire, the very human desire to want to have a way of doing things and discard the ways that we don't see are effective or efficient or our truth, it's a very human thing, and it's very driven by the ego. Unfortunately, it's the desire to put something on the pedestal, so that can't we just all get on the same page at least and not harm one another? No, that's never going to happen. Like people are like, can't we all just agree and at least do that? No, that's not the design of this world. And the sooner we embrace that, the sooner we're going to find freedom amongst people who believe differently than we do and feel more detached and free in our own convictions.
I love that you're saying that. And although that is something I have often recognized, I've never actually heard it put into words. But that's so true. There's this constant lull of many people wanting us to all think or do the same.
Yeah. So we can feel secure and validated in our separateness.
Wow. But you're saying that would be ego trying to do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's the shadow aspect of ego. It's a shadow aspect of ego. It's wanting think about it like a little kid. Have you ever been around? I love little kids. Like I'm such a fan. And when they're toddlers or they get to be like, even like 5 or 6, they like to dictate what everybody does. Okay, you be the prince and you be the villain. And they love to kind of step into that dictatorial role of control. And the ego, one of the shadow aspects, is really this desire to control others. And then we miss the co-creative aspect in our partnerships and our friendships, co-creative aspect with God or the unknown, the unseen forces, the unpleasant traumas. I mean, we miss out on a lot, but I think it really stems from the desire to feel safe and secure, which we're never safe or secure. Like we always have that humanity that, we're not indestructible.
So, I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and Jehovah's Witnesses believe that one day, at some unsuspected, unforeseen time, the end is going to come, and the entire world where we live now will be turned into a paradise, and there's going to be no suffering, no crying, no disease, no death. And in my head, I'm like, that just seems, and live forever. No death, zero death. I think, and even when I was little, I'm no longer a Jehovah's Witness, in case anybody is wondering here. When I was little, I remember 12, 13, I was like so confused, like how, I'm like, what if somebody hurts somebody in an accident? Like, what if you and I are building a house together and then I accidentally smash your hand with a hammer? Like, you're not going to be mad at me? You're not going to like hold a little bit of resentment for even just a few minutes? Like, it just seems so strange to me. I want to, what is your thought process on that? Is that even, is it not possible in this world? Is it possible? This is opinion. This is just you and I chatting right now.
This is why I love kids, because kids ask the questions. I know, you know, the more we can connect with our inner child and having those sort of eureka moments where we're like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. And then we're taught, well, just have faith and you'll get it eventually. And we're like, okay. And if I don't, I'm going to be kicked out of the tribe. Right. So like, there's this like threat of ostracism. And then that really control. I mean, think about people who are not leaving their job for their health insurance or what their family's going to think about them. I mean, it controls our lives across the board. So with this idea of like this promise that this is coming, maybe, I don't know. Like, I'm not God. I can't foretell the future. And I think anybody who says they can is kidding themselves, because any moment we can shift, we can change. That's our gift. So with this idea of something in the future being the perfect world, I think, why are we not celebrating this world that, if you really do believe God created this world and it was good, and God is in everything, and all power, omniscient, omnipotent, if you really believe those foundational principles, which is what I would always go back to when I was trying to figure out my own way.
Yes.
That none of the other stuff really made a lot of sense to me. I thought, if that's my compass and that's my framework to build this human house that I'm moving into and moving through this life, I have to keep that in everything I do. I mean, this whole namaste at the end of yoga class, they were like, namaste. Like, yeah, great. Yeah, that's really an awesome saying, but not if you're just going namaste to the people in your yoga class. What about honoring that divine or that teacher or that spark within every person, especially that person? If everyone's a teacher, if everyone has God in it, is every trauma, if everything is of God, things look very differently than this is God and then that is evil. It's the polarity again.
Wow. For those that don't know, what does namaste mean?
Namaste means a lot of different interpretations, but more of the teacher within me bows to the teacher in you, or the light in me, or the divine in me recognizes that divine in you.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's kind of like the WWJD bracelets. Do you remember those back in the day when we were kids? I'm like, can we just go back to those, please? Or like, you know, what would Buddha do? What would Jesus do? What would Muhammad do? Like, let's look at those bracelets and say, let's focus on the spiritual teachings of the great masters, rather than all of the shouldn'ts and the danger of going to hell or heaven, or like, you're going to be ostracized, kicked out of your family, or like, it's not been working. That's why we see systems crashing everywhere. But we can't demonize the systems in the process, or we get trapped into another system.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, I love this. I could just go on forever about this. I just want to take a quick second for those that are listening live. Thank you so much for being here, for all of the beautiful comments, and for supporting Anne and I while we chat here. For those of you watching on the replay or that are coming in a little bit late, make sure that you hashtag replay so that we know that you were here and we can send you some love. While we have a large amount of people hanging out with us here, I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about what you do, you know, what you've created, and how we can find you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate that. Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. We love these questions, right? We go on forever. You can find me. My website is RaiseTheVibration.com. That's RAISE. RaiseTheVibration is singular.com. And I'm a spiritual coach, so I do everything virtually now. I am a spiritual channel as well. I had a very Abraham Hicksy experience about 6 years ago and have been channeling for people, connecting them with their past lives, with making sense or reconciling their life, connecting them more so with their purpose and the genuine gift that they have for the world, aligning with their vibration. I just released a book in New York City last month where it kind of came to me in the lockdown of March of 2020 to like get people to focus on their resilience. And so I asked a bunch of my friends, focus on their resilience. Could they write a story 1,000 words or less? So that book that was just released is a weekly guide to raise your vibration, learning how to alchemize the human experience. So there are 52 authors who have contributed their stories of resilience, and I've integrated chakra wisdom with that too. So that book is now available online too. But you can also follow me on Instagram, raise.the.vibration, and I'm on Facebook too, of course, and YouTube.
I love it. Where do you hang out the most?
Home.
Social media wise.
I'm just kidding. Nature in the mountains. I have a lot on Instagram and Facebook, and the book also gives a lot of insight into different talks that I've given in the past. So I have a lot of material online of just inspirational talks, weekly talks, that kind of thing.
That's great.
Yeah, and why you can reach out to me through the website if you're interested in coaching or channeling.
Beautiful. And why do you do what you do? How did you fall into Raise the Vibration?
Raise the Vibration dropped into my head on the subway like about a week before 9/11 in New York City. And it just said, I meant to raise the vibration. I'm a songwriter, so I was writing some lyrics. I meant to raise the vibration of the world, and I'm starting today. And I think that just kind of dropped in, but I've just been diligently trying to understand myself and the world around me since I was a kid, and just relentlessly trying to make peace and reconnect with the pure connection to God that I felt as a kid, and that I feel is all our gift of being alive. And just, I love manifesting. I mean, I have so many things I've manifested in my life because I love this life. So I do this to help people fall in love with their own lives and to get back a lot of the power they've given away through alchemy.
That's awesome. I have a very similar story to that with the name of my company. So my company is Human Better 365. Nice. And I just recently found the last few months, I did not know this, but I'm going through I've got tons and tons of yellow notepads everywhere, just nice. Just piled up everywhere. And every once in a while I go through them and I'll, throw stuff out, make notes, do the stuff that's on the pads. Yeah. But anyways, I found not too long ago a list of like possible business names.
Yeah.
And Human Better was on the list. Totally forgot about it.
I love it. Such a great name.
Thank you. And then 4 or 5 years ago or something, was in a coaching class, a business coaching class, and I was fiddling. We were talking about growing our business or whatever, and I'm like scribbling down names because at that point my name was called Pure Aspirations, and it just wasn't like wasn't hitting good anymore. Felt good at the time, but didn't feel good anymore. And I'm scribbling all this stuff, and I'm putting down human, I'm putting down better, all of these words, and I show it to the girl next to me. And I'm like, I'm trying to like figure something out. She literally circled the word better and the word human. And I said, better human or human better. We were writing because it was like in the middle of class. So I wrote down better human or human better on the piece of paper that we were kind of like both looking at. And she circled human better. And I went with it. I'm like, girl, I freaking love it. Human is a verb. And then literally just a few months ago was going through my stuff and saw that I actually came up with it myself like a decade ago.
It's amazing how things like that drop in on a subconscious level. And then you realize the whole first part of the book, before the stories begin, I talk about the background of Raise the Vibration and why. And I love science. I love the practicality of spirituality, and being able to tap into our vibrational frequency and our alignment influences all aspects of our lives. And we go through what we go through, and then we realize why we did it and all the influences that were co-creating with us, and we didn't even realize it. And I mean, that was Raise the Vibration for me as well. It's like, oh, okay, it's all rooted in science. We understand electromagnetism now, and we understand like how it all fits together, and why when we're in alignment, we attract what it is we desire.
100%. What's your big dreams for your company and your community? What are you dreaming of?
Well, I thanks for asking. I had such a strong community in Astoria in New York City, where it was just so amazing in-person community, and I'm moving that online now to have an entire website that's a membership connection and a lot of free material as well, to keep that community growing. And you know, I'm writing my second book now, and our big dream, Anthony and I, we're partners in life and business, is to actually have a ranch in Colorado and have it be a retreat ranch. We've given tons of retreats. We do relationship retreats, all kinds of things, but to have it be a place where we can have a whole farm and petting zoo, and have a place where people can get in touch with nature, because that for me is so healing. So that's the bigger picture. Yeah. Well, I'm hoping like 10 years from now we'll have that realized, but that's the longer term.
That's fantastic. So how is it going right now as far as online and building the community online?
It's going great. The big push has been with the book lately. So that's what I've been, you know, we just had the big launch party in the East Village in New York, and it was so fun. And now we're getting it into the digital version. So there's an interactive PDF, because the book is, I mean, it has the stories, you know, and each chapter, 52 chapters, so one for each week of the year. It has the story, and then it has chakra wisdom and a personalization for a journaling prompt for you to personalize the author's wisdom that wrote the story and the messages. Mm-hmm. And then little check-ins. You'll appreciate it. Has like 3 celebrations, so 3 brags about your week, like documenting your daily miracles. And then at the end, there's empty pages for you to write your own story. So I really believe in storytelling. I believe in what you're doing, and the power of processing your own story and owning it. And it's like those little tiny pieces that we try and kick off the bus about ourselves. And it's like, you can't kick them off the bus. Yeah. Every one of us has like a killer inside of us. Everyone has these sort of like negative aspects. It's how we use it. Mm-hmm. That's, you know, the hammer is not the enemy. It's how you use it, you know, that, you know, you're hitting yourself over your head or you're building the house. Yeah. So it's just taking responsibility for that. And yeah.
What would be some advice you'd give to a female right now who's struggling in finding a community?
Go on to Raise the Vibration and sign up for the next Women's Circle. I've had this Women's Circle now. It'll be 20 years in next January. And this is something I started after a bad breakup 20 years ago. I started with 3 other women in my little tiny apartment in New York, and we now do this virtually online. And that's such a source for women. Thousands of women from all over the world have participated. I've mentored people to start their own circles. That's something that's always kind of been on the back burner that I just stir occasionally, but it's been such a source of support for me. In my monthly check-in, we talk about the visualization of the month ahead and letting go of what's not worked. And I mean, in indigenous times, like storytelling, women would all menstruate at the same time. Like, what a force. Can you imagine? So we would just get the hell out of Dodge and go and hang out. And, you know, if you've read The Red Tent, but you go hang out and talk about the intuitive wisdom of your experiences or what you're intuiting for another woman, and all would be like this collective journal. And that's why we meet around the new moon, is that energy of new beginnings and just amazing support. And I didn't have a lot of friends growing up, like female friends. I was such a tomboy, such a jock. I was terrified of women. So like when I started this 20 years ago, I was like, am I really doing this? And I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm doing this. And I mean, the richness of the women and the sisterhood in my life is like unbelievable. It's just so powerful.
What could someone expect in a women's circle?
In the women's circle, it's very structured, like any group therapeutic dynamic. And I take that very seriously, because if it's like, you don't know what you're going to find when you show up, you don't know if like, we're going to like take off our bras and like throw things around and like get crazy. And I mean, there's enough craziness in our own emotional and reality, like our own lives, that I don't think you need a lot of pomp, I just don't. So it's very, very structured every time. We have an icebreaker of just connecting with where we are. We talk about the astrological implications of the energies at play for all of us, connecting with, the moon that controls our cycles and all the other planetary bodies that influence us in some way or another. And then we do a guided visualization to personalize those energies and process it personally. A little journaling and some sharing and celebrations of our wins at the end. And the last bit that we do, the last ritual that we do is a speaking into existence the desire for the month ahead, and then all of the women declaring, that the desire is on its way, so that we all collectively hold that space and visualize that reality for that woman. It's very powerful. It's beautiful. Yeah.
You do that weekly?
Monthly.
Very nice. Specific day?
New moon, around the new moon. So it's usually the Sunday around the new moon, because if it's on a Tuesday night and you've got something, like, we usually always do it on the Sunday around the new moon. But all the details, I don't know if we've updated it for the next new moon yet, but they're all up there.
I love it. Yeah. Well, I so appreciate you hanging out.
Pleasure. My absolute pleasure. Your absolute love and just shining so much light into the world. Thanks for what you do.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for taking some time into your day to trust me.
Oh, yeah. It's fun.
The Her Version platform, and share some of your backstory and some of the nuggets of information. For those of you watching live, thank you for being here. We appreciate you hanging out with us. I'm going to go ahead and close up. For anyone who resonated with Anne-Margaret and all of the wonderful goodness that she shared, make sure you connect with her. Her website is underneath her head area right there, RaiseTheVibration.com. And in the description should be her Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, I believe. So make sure you connect with her wherever you are most comfortable. So thank you for joining us here on Her Version. This community is expanding every single day and is filled with females who are striving to do better than they did yesterday. For those of you that are new to this podcast and like content like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you follow, like, and share. If you have an amazing story to share or struggle to triumph, be sure to reach out to me here or at herversion.life. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria, and I'm so grateful to be here sharing a platform that allows people to share their truth. As always,